Welcome to Google DeepMind, the podcast, with me, your host, Professor Hannah Fry. We are well into the era of generative AI now. Just a few years ago, it was very difficult to imagine that AI could successfully produce stunning videos or compose symphonies or make art in the style of great Dutch masters or write a pacey thriller that has you on the edge of your seat. But today, all of this has come to pass, and the limits of what machines can achieve in the creative endeavours are being nudged forwards all the time. But is AI capable of true creativity? Well, one person who has been dreaming about this moment for decades is Doug Eck. He is a pioneer in the world of generative AI and most recently oversaw the release of Google's state-of-the-art video and image generation models. At Google DeepMind, Doug is a senior research director who leads research across generative media. He's also a musician, and when he's not playing piano or guitar, you might find him pondering some big questions about the social purpose of art and whether an AI will ever win an Oscar, both of which seem like excellent questions for our conversation. How long have you been working in this space?
I guess I can say with some pride I'm OG in this space. I back in 2000, 2001, I was trying to get recurrent neural networks to play jazz and blues music. We didn't have data, we didn't have compute, but we had passion. That's what we had. And in 2015 and 2016, I created a project that I'm very proud of called Magenta, and which stands for Music and Art Generation. And we were one of the early teams exploring the creative aspects of generative AI. And we were at the phase that the technology there was quite young. And so I've been thinking about these issues for a long time. And I'm very, very excited to see where we are now. It's like technology is starting to catch up with my own personal aspirations, which is so cool. Like if this happened 10 years or 15 years later and I were retired, I would just be like, oh God, I missed it, right? So I feel so excited to be here, able to do it while it's happening.
Well, in terms of your personal aspirations then, was this the kind of thing that you wanted to happen back when you were younger?
In some ways it outstrips. I think we've done more than I thought was possible. I really have to say that. I think the what we've seen with models like Transformer and Diffusion and a bunch of other stuff has really moved the field faster than I had imagined. This hasn't been like a gradual, slow climb. We've hit a step change in the last 5 years, and then it's like unblocked a bunch of potential. And I think it's the combination of compute. It's a combination of a lot of things, but things didn't move very much, and then they moved a lot. And I think that's important to point out, right? So now we're kind of trying to figure out this technology. It's really exciting.
I guess if we are asking whether AI can be creative, it probably makes sense for us to try and define what we mean by creativity in the first place. Can you?
You had to ask, yes. The creativity question. I think a lot of people talk about creativity with a capital C versus a lowercase c. Clearly AI models are capable of creating new samples that look novel to us, that surprise us, that delight us. I think in that case, the question's answered and has been answered for probably a decade. Yes. On the other hand, we talk about genuinely new ideas, genuinely new genre, for example. I think, we're not there right now. We're not seeing AI models really move the art field yet like that. Furthermore, I think there's a social component to creativity with a capital C that matters a lot to me, which is, I care about the people that are creating the art that I consume, whether it's a painting or whether it's music. One of my favorite examples of this is, for a while, AC/DC disappeared from the streaming service. This is a long time ago. Like this is probably 15 years ago. And so my son and I listened to Back in Black together. It was just one of these, my son, who was 7 at the time. And so AC/DC disappeared, and it was replaced in the streaming services by this AC/DC cover band that managed to kind of game the system. So if you searched for Back in Black, their album came up and got played, and it kind of had a similar cover, and so I didn't notice. And I heard it, and it was just horrible because I couldn't, I know the voices of the actual singers that made the music. It's real to me. And my son was like, oh, this is the same thing. What do you mean, Dad? This is it. This is the music. And so for him, he didn't have the social connection to the artist, right, at his age. It was like a pretty, almost bit perfect Back in Black cover, right? But for me, it was utterly appalling. And I think, when we talk about art and creativity, we talk about the people that made it, because that's really what matters to us. There's a connection, right? There's a connection to us. If we had AI that could make the 13th Beatles album, then it could make the 14th Beatles album. Then it could make the 114th Beatles album, et cetera, et cetera. And you have a kind of puzzle here. It's like, no, that's not what the Beatles are. They're a point in time. They're the 1960s and 1970s. They're my childhood. They're John and Paul and George and Ringo. And that matters a lot. I think that matters tremendously. I don't think that we should rule out a future where there are AI agents that we grow to appreciate and follow, and that move the field, and that appear on podcasts, with professors. But we're not there right now. And I think if we talk too long about creativity and leave behind the social part of art, we're really missing the point.
That's so interesting. I mean, we've got quite deep quite quickly here, haven't we?
Sorry. I just had my coffee.
But I like that idea that art is something about communicating the human experience, and that actually that cannot be replicated, at least for now.
Agreed. And there's a ton of, people talk about this, there's a ton of thought experiments. One is, even if you talk about human-created art, if you had a time machine, by the way, if you have a time machine, there are other things that you might want to do. Sure. But let's say you have a time machine. One thing you could do is take an Andy Warhol painting and ship it back to 13th century France. And I argue, and most people would argue intuitively, that would just make no sense. What is this Campbell soup can that we're looking at? Who the hell is Marilyn Monroe? Yeah. And so artists are constantly pointing to culture, making comments about culture, moving culture. And these cultural questions are all right now created by, driven by, responded to by us. Right.
So the social side of art and the importance of that, I want to come back to that in a bit. Yeah. But it's almost like you're splitting it into two different categories there. There's the originality of just, it hasn't existed before, but then there's the quality and depth of the ideas and the originality of that. Right. Is that
I think so. And one thing that, if we go back to move away from the culture question and move to the science, we've been able to generate great images with AI for quite some time. What we haven't had is controllability. So the ability for a user to type in a prompt, for example, and actually get the image that they asked for. That is one of the major parts of the breakthrough that we've seen with transformer models and with diffusion models, this idea of controllability.
Perfect.
But that ability to express ourselves, coupled with the power of AI, is where we're seeing something interesting. So I want the AI to be really powerful and to do really cool things for me, but I've got to be able to control it somehow. Or otherwise, frankly, it just becomes pretty boring pretty fast.
Actually, in a lot of ways the creativity remains in the human rather than in the AI alone.
Yes, but yes and. That doesn't mean that the technology doesn't matter, right? There's a marriage between the technology and the artist that is just incredibly important. And for me, as what I do is music. I don't claim to be a great musician because I'm not. So I'm well aligned. But that, I'm kind of addicted to the flow state that comes from improvising on piano or on guitar. And there's a point where you forget, cognitively, you forget that this piano's not you. Really, or the electric guitar, you forget that it's not you and it's this extension of you. And that is beautiful, right? That's technology giving rise to new forms of self-expression. And we're trying to get that with AI. At least I am. That's my goal, right? The goal is can we build a new way that you can take these ideas that are in your brain and get them out there?
Do you reckon that's possible though, to have it where you are so connected with an AI, where you are so in control of it that you cease to realize that it's not just an extension of your body?
I do think it's possible. And I think it's even happening now with some of the stuff that we're working on. And I also don't want to overstay, I don't want to mystify that. I think one of the challenges with AI is getting that fit right. Fitting the AI to our own, the way that we as humans understand the art that we're trying to create. I think later we may see entirely new genre or entirely new forms of art come up. There may be a new word that is not music and is not painting and is not photography and is not, film or movie making, and that AI will have helped us create it, right? We're not there yet. Where we are now is kind of living in our current genre. So we're using AI to make images. We're using AI to make music, using AI to make video. But even then, to back to your question, I think it's already possible now. As we're making music models faster, we're able to get closer and closer to real time. And you can think about, we're not quite there yet, that you might be able to, like, as a musician, play your guitar along with the AI. Like it's a kind of smart looper pedal. You know, you have a pedal that kind of keeps looping. And that's the simplest example.
Yeah. I mean, I really like that as a view for the future, because I guess now where we're at is that it's really a case of a human curating and then instructing and honing and refining, rather than necessarily that the whole process is like seamlessly integrated with one another.
I think that's right. I think I would say like transformation, curation, and then creation would be sort of the three that I would think are out there right now. An example of transformation is I took a photograph, I transform it into something else that I love even more using AI. That's transformation.
Yeah.
Right. Curation.
Just put the face filter on, make myself look better. Go
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Good old fashioned Instagram. I'm a big fan. Curation is, the AI is like allowing me to play around in a space and suggest things to me that might surprise me and be useful. Right. And creation. So just actually creating something new from a prompt. So that's the hardest, I think.
Yeah.
To do well.
But then, okay, that question of originality, is AI actually creating things that are original, or is it in some ways just mimicking what exists already?
I think it's allowing us to create something original. I think we have to admit that, even though these models are trained on data from our world. I've often said they are reflecting our world, but they're kind of like funhouse mirrors. So they're not reflecting our world perfectly with a perfectly flat plane, right? And in doing so, these funhouse mirrors can actually give rise to some very, very interesting new materials. And I think we have to admit that those materials are actually new and transformative and giving us new things to work with.
The descriptions that we're using here are quite like, I'll sort of know creativity when I see it, almost, right? Like, is it, isn't it? You can debate it, you can't. Do you have ways that you measure creativity in AI?
I mean, we can certainly measure we can use distance measures. The basic idea is to take you could do a pixel by pixel distance of an image and another image, and that might not
see how similar they are to one another, how far apart.
Then you realize the pixels might be scaled differently and things like that. So you move to more sophisticated measures. We can measure the distance from the training set and things like that. We can measure something called recitation, which is the model regurgitating chunks of the training set. So we have ways to do it. I think there's still, we still really need to rely upon human evaluation to understand this well. I mean, we're quite good at this, right? And machines end up being quite middling. Of they're not perfect at this, but I think we have ways to measure the distance from how novel the outputs are, for sure.
Okay, then, so I wanted to ask you actually, when AlphaGo happened, there was that very famous Move 37 where, in the match with Lisa Doll, which really shocked all the Go experts and the AI researchers, because it was, I think, really outside of traditional Go strategies. Has there been an equivalent like that in your field of creativity? Is there something where you're like, that is a moment of creativity which I'm really surprised by?
I haven't seen anything yet where I feel like there was this perfect and brilliant marriage of artist and AI. I've seen suggestive work, certain visual artists who are just generating stuff I really love. I'm sure there are lots of artists out there who are like, wait, I had my Move 37, here it is. I'd love to hear from them. But no, I think it's just tantalizingly close. I mean, my mind has been blown multiple times. My mind was blown the first time that I heard some of the music compositions done by Music Transformer, which is a project I was part of. Like, I felt like it was the first time we've heard a neural network able to make insanely interesting music.
We're not just talking about music here, though, right? I mean, this is like in lots of different spaces that you're hoping AI will be creative.
Of course, yes.
So tell me about some of the models.
Well, let's talk about the visual world. Let's talk about image generation and video generation. Okay, so I have my laptop here for you. The first thing I wanted to show you was an image done by Imagine 3, which is our most capable image generation model.
Okay, so we have got a mixed landscape, some sort of grass is a bit sort of sandy in the background, a bit sort of rocky and mountainous. And then there are 3 very beautifully composed hot air balloons, which look extremely realistic. The lighting is consistent across all 3 of them, as though the lights come from one particular direction in the shot. It looks, at a glance, very, very real. I think when you look really, really carefully, you might say, oh, those rocks are perhaps a little bit pointier than you might expect in reality. But at a glance, it's extremely convincing as real.
And in fact, I'm glad you noticed the pointy rocks, because they're actually in some sense real as well. So this prompt is, I'll read the entire prompt, shot in the style of DLSR camera, which you feel, with polarizing filter.
Oh.
A photo of 3 hot air balloons floating over the unique rock formations in Cappadocia, Turkey. It turns out those rock formations look pointy, just like this.
Amazing.
And the colors and patterns on these balloons contrast beautifully against the earthy tones of the landscape below. It's almost a poem.
Yeah, it is.
This was done by Irina Block on our team. She's a genius. We call her a prompt whisperer.
Really?
This shot captures the sense of adventure that comes with enjoying such an experience. It is poetic.
That is very poetic.
Like, I don't know if you noticed, but like the balloons are not exactly round. Like they're a little bit like misshapen. Someone else pointed this out and we looked. That happens when the wind blows on a hot air balloon.
No.
So these pointy rocks are like actually, it's what it looks like in Cappadocia, Turkey. And like even these little deformations that you're seeing, the models where we are with image generation with Imagine 3 is truly astonishing.
So I wonder how much of that is how much work is that prompt doing in terms of the way that the prompt is written, in terms of the style of that prompt? Because presumably Irina is writing prompts all day, every day,
She's
really
quite
up
good
close
at
and
it.
personal
She's quite good
with
at
these
it.
models.
Yeah.
So, but she's not just writing 3 hot air balloons,
right?
In Turkey.
Right. So this is, you hit on one of the most challenging and I think interesting parts of getting these models to work well, which is how well does the model respond to very specific prompts. Prompt coherence, we call it. And getting prompt coherence right is utterly critical to allow someone like Irina, who has this idea in her head, to get it out, right? And so if all the model did was respond to, 3 hot air balloons floating over some mountains, we wouldn't be able to get the kind of detail that we're seeing here. And she has learned, she's kind of figured out the model. And you could say that we should do a better job of generating images of exactly this high quality, even for someone who's not Irina Block. If Irina Block is the only one that can make these images, we have a problem here. And in fact, it's true. You can pretty quickly come up to speed on these prompts. She just happens to be an artiste. Let's move to video. So this is a 1 minute and 5 second video from Veo.
And Veo is the new Google model.
Veo is our new Google video generation model. So there's 4 prompts here. A fast-tracking shot through a bustling dystopian sprawl with bright neon signs, flying cars and mist, night, lens flare, volumetric lighting. And then it continues to a fast-tracking shot through a futuristic dystopian sprawl with bright neon lights, starships in the sky, night, volumetric lighting, slightly different, so minor changes. And then we bring a car in, a neon hologram of a car driving at top speed of light, cinematic, incredible details, volumetric lighting. So if I were to describe what you should see, we're going to come in from the top. It's a tracking shot. We're going to come down from the tracking shot. We're going to have this neon hologram of a car driving at the speed of light, cinematic. And then the car leaves the tunnel back into the real world city of Hong Kong. So we should expect a kind of transition back to Hong Kong.
All right, okay. So we're starting off, there's no other way to describe it than what the prompt said. You got these buildings covered in neon lights. It's very smooth, this tracking shot. And then you speed up and zoom in closer and closer. You're in between the buildings now. Ooh. And then we have this car racing through the streets. You can see the neon lights reflected in the wet pavement below. There's other cars jostling for position around, and it's almost like everything is blurred because you're just going so fast. But it's really consistent. Now it's gone through a tunnel. There are these big lights overhead, and it's come out of the tunnel into an extremely realistic modern scene.
It's a wow moment.
That's incredible.
That's a wow moment, right?
And it was seamless. We were following the car the entire way.
If there's that's maybe it's not quite as good as Delise at all, but like when we come out of that tunnel, like I get chills.
So this is not only that each individual scene is following the prompt, it's that it's blending between the scenes too.
So there's what's called an autoregressive component that provides coherence over time.
How?
the magic of AI.
I mean, because video is much harder than image anyway, right? Tell us why.
Well, I mean, there's two reasons why. One is just, and one way to look at it is video is lots of images, somewhere between 24 and 30 frames a second. And so there you are. For a second of video, you have to generate,
more.
But there's also this temporal coherence problem, and that's the massive thing. So,
temporal coherence meaning it's got to make sense as you go forward in time.
Yeah. I mean, it's like even simple things like someone's dribbling a basketball, and the basketball kind of can't change. That basketball's dribbling away. And so these physics issues, like how do you simulate the physics of the world in a way that is reflective of the real world we live in?
So that you believe it is a basketball.
That is correct.
Because if it's wobbling around, the edges aren't quite right, or the color changes, or the pattern changes, or it just doesn't move in a realistic way. I mean, there's lots of layers to that then that you have to get right.
Absolutely true. And even if you look at, I really like this.
So this is a little puppy in a bathtub, and it's got some suds on its nose.
Look at the suds drop.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's so nice, right?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of coherence problem we're talking about. How does the model figure out the fact, like the way that the soap suds is falling from the chin of the puppy, and then at some point in time the puppy moves its head, and then it drops.
At which point the suds drop.
Yeah.
Now, okay, my background is in fluid dynamics. Mm-hmm. I know. If I tried to do that with using equations,
you're
in for an entire PhD.
That's right.
That is. But this is doing it just based on the images.
It is. No, it's doing more than that. I think it's safe to say that these models are learning about the physics of the world from the videos. Yes. So the input are annotated videos, annotated with a description of what's happening in the video, mm-hmm. and the model's being presented with the frames of the video. That's the input. It is, in order to reproduce these videos, to do good generation, it seems to be helpful for the model to learn about the physics of the world. And so we're as excited about these models as world simulators, physics simulators, as we are about the ability to use them to make film. We can talk about simulating environments for robotics. We can talk about simulating environments for almost anything. And to the extent that these models capture real-world physics, including fluid dynamics, which you above all in the room know is hard, like really hard, right?
It's very hard.
It's quite remarkable. We are thinking about 3D. We're thinking about ways to provide users, filmmakers, or everybody with the ability to explicitly control camera. We can do it with text prompts now. So there's a lot of room for improvement. This is just the beginning. But I think Veo and Imagine 3 and the music work really does mark a watershed moment for us in terms of where we are with this research.
How can this be used then? Because this goes beyond just creating pretty images.
I mean, absolutely. I think the major use case here does flow from the fact that these models learn something about the physical world. Models that can in one way or another learn about the physics of the world can be incredibly useful for scientific exploration, for simulation, and et cetera. So I think there's a whole scientific discovery directionality around this work. There's also the creative aspects, which we spent a lot of time talking about. Those are the two major areas that I see.
Because I think for a lot of people, this image generation, the video generation, even the music generation sort of feels like it's come very quickly from nowhere. But you have been dreaming about this for a long time.
Yeah, actually I have. So like some kids will talk about like professional soccer players will be like, I just was kicking a soccer ball from the time I was like 2, or like, I've been on ice skates. I was just kind of a weird kid. Like I was just like so fascinated by music. I grew up in the town is South Bend, Indiana, but it's, I grew up in a working class family, very happy, very proud of growing up in a working class family. We actually didn't have a lot of money, and I was asking for a piano, and I got a trumpet instead to do trumpet lessons because it was easier to rent a trumpet. It's true. But I remember I was even younger, 5 or 6 years old, my next door neighbors had a player piano. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, if you've never seen a player piano from the turn of the century, it has foot pedals that you pump back and forth, and those control bellows that send air through the system that then moves the air through a paper roll that has holes cut in it. And when the air is moved through the roll, when the roll has a hole in it, that causes the corresponding key to play. And I remember just asking my mom, can we go to Ed and Jean's house? I want to see the player piano. I was fascinated, like beyond, like kids' candy store. me, Doug, player piano, next door neighbor. It's almost bringing tears to my eyes to think about it now. So I have been thinking about the marriage of I didn't even know it until people, like I brought this thought came to mind when you asked this question. It's like, yeah, I've been thinking about technology and the interplay between technology and music since I was like 5.
But there is something quite magical about a machine playing music on its own.
Oh, it's so cool. It's so cool, yeah.
Well, then talk to me a bit about some of the stuff that you've been playing around with in the last 5 years.
I have been spending a lot of time thinking about the interplay between these technologies. How do they work together? I don't need to be in the room for Veo to get better or for Imagine to get better. There's so many great people working on this. But how do we actually put the pieces together? For example, I've been thinking a lot about, Pixar did something really beautiful, right? They took this technology and they turned it into a bunch of astonishing movies. And I don't think that we can follow the Pixar playbook, but I think we should be aware of what it really takes to move technology into everybody's lives with these movies. And how do we do that with AI? I think of heavier than air flight, right? What is it, 65 years? 60-something years between, less than 70 years between the first flight and landing on the moon, right? And if you look at AI, we've been doing this for at least 30 years, right? And so what happens 30 years into this other industry? You've already figured out flight. What you're thinking about now are creating airlines. You're thinking about how do you actually move people around the world? How do you connect people? How do you, you're solving for something much different than aeronautics. You're still solving for aeronautics, right? You have to keep solving for aeronautics.
But it's a level beyond.
But it's a level beyond that. How can we do something that matters? And to do something that matters is going to require not just building these models, but actually figuring out how they fit, how they fit in society, how they fit for users. What are we actually building here?
I think there's something really important in that. I think it's something that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, which is what does this mean for people? Because there are some people, of course, who are welcoming these changes with open arms, but there are other people who are maybe a bit more reluctant or concerned about it.
Agreed. I mean, so first, I share these concerns. I think we need to be very cautious. We've been working on this for a long time. We've been thinking about it for a long time. In some ways, we've moved slowly in this space because we realize how much impact we can have. And we're trying to listen to the community. So we have spent not months or weeks, but years working with artists, listening to musicians, listening to visual artists, thinking even about theater, about filmmaking, trying to understand how this work fits in. And for me, it's some of the most rewarding, it's maybe the most rewarding part of what I'm doing is working with these communities and trying to understand, what can we do that's great, right, for these communities and for everyone. And so we take that responsibility very seriously.
So what can you do then? Because of course, the training of these models is based on intellectual property that's created by humans. How can you sort of negotiate that issue?
So we're thinking about ways of identifying, watermarking, attributing the outputs of our models back to the creators. And this remains a very hard and open question, but where we want to help build new ways to compensate artists for their work. I think it's incredibly important to get this right. And we also want to make sure that we're using technologies like SynthID to watermark and make sure that we can identify this work as it moves through the ecosystem. I'm a musician. I have work up on SoundCloud. I won't tell you how to find it. Even though it's like 5 songs, they're mine, right?
I think I found it already, actually. I actually did. Some of the AI music you did in lockdown.
Yeah.
I found it.
Okay,
I found it.
I'm going to get 50 or I might get 100 hits after this is over, But I feel very strongly that we need to protect that, creative intellectual property ownership, right, of that work.
So what might that look like in future? Is it where you give royalties to people whose work is included in the models? How does it work?
So I think there's a couple ways to think about it. These are all like. So first, let me say, we're adding building blocks towards a solution, which is a protocol that allows a website to annotate what what works are okay to train on for AI. And you know what? I'm fine if someone uses that to completely say nothing in my website is okay to train. It's totally cool with me, right?
Yeah.
Other people are going to want to be part of that. They're going to want to see their work show up there. So that's one thing. Then how do you take work and put it in the system in a way that makes it really clean and easy to do attribution? And that's the hard problem, right? So, one technology that's out there is called retrieval-based generation. So imagine what you have is a system that in general knows about the physics of the visual world. It's trained on licensed data. It's trained on, generic data. But now you're an artist with a very interesting and vivid visual style. Maybe we can retrieve your work. By that I mean your work is represented with your permission in some database that has some vectors of numbers that would allow us to use your style. That retrieval yields some vectors that we're attending to when we generate. And now we generate an image that is very clearly reflecting your style. Well, the attribution issues become quite simple now. We retrieved your work with your permission. We can annotate that image as being generated with your style, and then that opens the door for marketplaces.
So I guess my second follow-up question to that is, has the horse not already bolted? Like, these models are already producing outputs based on the work of artists.
I think that we already have lots of ways that we could get this wrong. I really think a lot about what happened with music during the MP3 revolution, and then we had LimeWire, and then we had Napster, maybe not in that order, and BitTorrent. And this was not good for music artists at all. And, one example of something that I think worked well at that point in time was YouTube. And I'm quite proud of what we did, because I was a very small tangential part of it as an audio researcher.
In the sense that it allowed artists to connect with their audiences on their own terms.
Yeah, so what we did was we created a user experience that was better than BitTorrent, built an entire takedown mechanism for infringing content, built a creator network that not only connects creators to their fans, but allows them to build their careers and monetize their careers. And now it's a quite thriving ecosystem, and it's not the only ecosystem out there. So, we should hope to see ecosystems that are like YouTube. They're not YouTube maybe, but maybe they are. My YouTube colleagues are like, wait, maybe it could be, They're like YouTube, but they're extra moving parts that account for the generative process, but still create this flow of money, frankly. Like, we all got to eat, right? This flow of money and this flow of attribution, and also the ability to market yourself as an artist and show the world, and frankly, try to get famous. That's cool too. Like, a lot of what happens on the Creator Network is you're trying to get famous. That's great. I want all of these things to be able to happen. We don't have a solution, and I particularly personally don't have a solution, but I see tantalizing possibility to see marketplaces and ecosystems like the one I just described work in generative.
That's things from the perspective of the artist, but there is another perspective here, which is from the perspective of the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you, if it's suddenly you're lowering the barrier to entry to create music, to create art, to create literature, to, whatever it might be, how do you avoid the audience being flooded with junk?
Yeah. I already mentioned that if you can generate the 13th Beatles album, you can generate the millionth, right? So, I think one of the connectors here is back to people as artists connecting with people. I think we will start to trust, even if it's a curation issue, we'll start to trust certain curators in the same way that we love certain DJs who are doing more than curating, don't get me wrong. But, we have that. I think part of it is we just sort of limit the true explosion of materials that are out there. Synth ID will give us, ways to identify these things as need be. But yeah, it's still a challenge, right? We're swimming in media.
But then I do wonder whether we end up in a situation where, let's say that you're a book publisher and you're reading submissions and suddenly you're inundated by generative AI novels. I mean, I think at the moment you can tell, but let's imagine in a future time where you can't. The only solution there is to have your own AI that's helping you with curation, surely.
Yeah, that's not crazy. I think you have this other question of trusting media. The flip side of that, which is I'm not a book author, I'm reading a news report that tells me that something happened somewhere in the world. there's two issues. Is it AI generated? And then is it actually true, right? Those are very, very, very big questions. And
Absolutely.
I think they're immensely important short-term questions that we need to deal with. We are trying to mitigate in certain ways this. For example, Gemini will limit the number of political queries that are possible during the election cycle, which I think is great. It kind of just slow things down a little bit.
What, to stop AI-generated articles from being...
That's
I
right.
see.
Yeah. So, this is one mitigation that you tie in with other mitigations to try to...
just turn the
be
volume down
responsible.
a bit. Yeah. Just thinking ahead to the future then, what do you imagine is going to happen in generative AI in the next 5 years or so?
What I'm seeing happening is a move towards multimodality.
Video, image, music.
Exactly.
Word.
And I think in doing so, I think what we're doing now is we're figuring out the AI for single modality issues. Like I showed you some really cool images. I showed you some really cool, I think they were cool, some cool videos. But then you start adding audio. And what you see is like, if we can truly meld the visual and the audio in a generative way, such that people can tell the stories that are in their heads in different ways, we really do change things. And I think that's what will happen in the next 5 years. We won't solve it in 5 years, I strongly believe, but we will start to just really creatively bring together these core chunks of technology. This is also the dream of Gemini. The mission of Gemini is explicitly and openly multimodal. We'll start to see the combinations of text and images combined differently, and that will open up a whole bunch of new creative and expressive.
Well, I also wonder though, I'm just going back to this point that you made earlier about how these things now understand physics. Everything we've spoken about really about creativity has been in the artistic space. Mm-hmm. But if you understand physics, is there a sort of potential there for a different type of creativity? I mean, if you understand aerodynamics, mm-hmm. could you in future go in and say, design me an airplane?
Yes. And I think if you had said more than 5 years, I think if we're talking about scientific discovery and having physics engines that will allow us to do things like build better airplanes, I also believe that will come. I actually hate making these predictions because I don't,
we all love it.
I'm putting that more in like the decade.
Okay, a decade, you think?
I think so. Yeah.
Wow. I think that feels short.
It does feel short, but if you look at what's been happening in robotics, like robotics has accelerated tremendously thanks to the use of language models, and now we're seeing diffusion being brought into this as well, in ways that are very, very surprising in terms of like how quickly we can allow robots to be able to basically dynamically exist in a changing world in terms of like grasp and things like that. And so if we see that and we start to see that we can also provide much, much higher resolution physics, I definitely see the door opening for the physics related stuff.
Just to finish on a point about art, because that has been so much of the discussion that we've had. Do you think there will be a point where an AI can win an Oscar or a Pulitzer Prize or some great photography competition?
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. The era of agents, that's the term we use to talk about like an AI that has an identity, I guess, is upon us. The attribution problem is very interesting here, right? You have people that are quite creative that are doing the coding. You have people that are trying to decide what are the goals of the model, of the agent, et cetera. If you're talking about winning an Academy Award, the thought experiment is like, there's really no human involved. I type into the prompt, okay, agent, go win me an Academy Award, and I get a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah,
right?
I think that's really what you're saying.
That's really what you're saying, yeah. I think we're very, 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 very far from that. And it could end up being like, one answer is, if we solve that, we may have solved AGI, right? Let's be real. Like it could be AGI hard with zero
external input, no editing.
Just please go win me an Academy Award.
No curation.
That's right, zero. I think that feels societally like an insanely hard thing. And it's going to be a pretty cool agent that pulls it off.
I think it also does bring us right back to the very beginning of our conversation, mm-hmm. which is that perhaps one of the biggest things about the reason why we consume art is because it's something about connecting to other humans and communicating the human experience. So I guess, yeah, I mean, that's distinctly lacking from an AGI-only generated Oscar film.
I want to go in the opposite direction. I think people are worried about AI taking them out of the participatory process, I want to bring more people in. So I want to take us back to the time before recorded music where we all stood around the piano and sang. And it might not be quite the same piano. It might be something like a piano that AI is helping us do that's lifting us all. But that, I think, is a beautiful goal. It's to bring more people into art making and into creativity, not fewer.
To use technology to increase human connection.
That's it.
I really
Perfectly
like that.
put.
I really like that. Well, I think that's the perfect point to finish on. So, Doug Eck, thank you so much for joining us on Google DeepMind, the podcast. You were brilliant.
And it's been such a pleasure to be here.
I know things quickly get deeply philosophical when you're talking about creativity and what that means in an era of AI. And from that conversation with Doug, I think that we're in a different place now than we were with the invention of the camera or the piano, which gave humans just a different medium to express themselves. The difference here, I think, in part is one of volume. As Doug said, what value would the millionth Beatles album have? And while AI can, of course, do a brilliant job of curation, I think that there are a lot of people who work in creative industries who are going to face substantial disruption over the next few years. But at the same time, I think there is something interesting about Doug's definition of creativity, the thing that needs to be preserved. That AI can't be truly creative on its own because the human component is missing. And I think there's something quite hopeful in that, actually, that even the people who are designing these tools, they see art and literature and music as deeply human endeavours for humans, by humans. And that is not going to change. You have been listening to Google DeepMind, the podcast presented by me, Professor Hannah Fry. If you'd like to learn more about what we've discussed, then you can check out the show notes in the description of this episode. We've got plenty more fascinating conversations with some of the top leaders in AI coming up on topics ranging from how AI is accelerating the pace of scientific discoveries to addressing some of the biggest risks of this technology. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. And if you have any feedback or you want to suggest a guest that you would like to hear from, then why not leave us a comment on YouTube? Until next time.